Good afternoon. I'm Sally Stang, Housing and Community Services Director for the City of Wichita. Today I'm joined by Nate with Kansas Legal Services. Once again, we're here to talk about the Wichita Emergency Rental Assistance Program. And we have a focus today on landlords. Earlier this week, we held a Facebook Live that had a tenant focus, so I want to thank Nate for being here. Once again, we got you twice in 1 week.
Oh, my pleasure. Go anywhere the air conditioning's good right now.
Yeah, that's for sure. So thank you so much for being here and providing this much needed information to our community, not just about the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, but also about the eviction moratorium and things that are happening that are going to have a significant effect with the expiration of the federal CDC moratorium that we expect next week already? Or is it the week after?
About the week after.
About the week after. So we're going to go ahead and start with a little bit of background on what is WERAP. WERAP is the Wichita Emergency Rental Assistance Program. It is funded from the Department of Treasury, and it provides rent and utility assistance for income-eligible families directly or indirectly affected by COVID-19. And it came to us through 2 stimulus bills passed by the federal government and is governed by rules that they put into effect. In order for families to qualify for the WERAP program, their income has to be under 80% of the area median income. They must have been directly or indirectly impacted by COVID-19, and they must be housing unstable, which means that they have arrears in rent, arrears in utility payments, might be living in substandard housing, or using loans and other means to pay their rent that are going to have a significant impact on them financially. They must be renting, so this program is absolutely just for renters of residential properties, not for homeowners. And they must, for our program, live within the Wichita city limits. So lots of eligibility criteria. But to add to that, the Department of Treasury mandated that we prioritize applicants that meet one or more preferences, that their income is actually below 50% of the area median income, or that they were employed at some time in 2020 but have been unemployed for the last 90 days. So we have that responsibility that when we receive applications, we have to take a look at and see whether or not the applicant actually claimed that they have one or more of those preferences. And those who don't have one or more of those preferences actually go to the bottom of the list and can't be served until we serve everybody that has one of those preferences. So what's new to WERAP, in recent weeks, we've actually launched a new requirement. It's a landlord certification form. It's actually an online fillable form. It helps us streamline the process, and it requires assurances from the landlords that they're going to keep the tenants stable in their housing. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of preview that form for us. It is, as I said, a fillable form, right, from our website, and it asks for information about the landlord. So we ran into many issues with us being able to identify who the owner of the property is, if there's a separate landlord or management company, who we really needed to contact. And so this landlord certification form goes to whomever the resident identified as their landlord. Sometimes it's an owner, sometimes it's a management company, but it allows them to be able to identify for us who that payment should be going to. It allows them to upload the property management agreement, vendor forms. If they're not already a vendor with the City of Wichita, they can upload those documents right from this online form, which is very, very helpful. We also ask them to provide us the names of those who are on the lease. And this is helping us in that a lot of times we were processing applications, they'd submit us a lease that started 3 years ago, and there was somebody else on that lease, and they've since either moved out, and the family is saying, you know what, Joe moved out. But we're like, well, your lease says Joe is there. By the landlord telling us on the landlord certification, they can say, hey, these are the people who are supposed to be on the lease. And it saves us some time from having to go back and say, hey, I need a lease addendum that says, tells us that so-and-so has been removed. So that's definitely helping things move along a little quicker. Information about the unit, year of construction, what the monthly contract rent is, what they are charging in late fees, all kinds of information on there, the term and period of the lease. And then we ask about what past due rent or fees are being requested from the program. And it allows them to put in month by month how much rent or fees the person is behind. So they can put in month at a time what they're asking for. So October of 2020, November of 2020, and so on. And then the total amount being requested. At the end of the form, we do ask that they sign certifications, obviously, that the information they're providing is true and complete. Again, though, we're also asking that by accepting the WERAP payment, that they're not going to evict the client for non-payment of rent for the period in which the client is receiving assistance, which is not only with the arrears, but at least 3 months going forward. So this is really big for us. It's very easy to fill out. They can sign right here online. Just hit the submit button. They don't have to attach it to an email, send it to anybody. It just sends it automatically to us. So this is definitely new for us. It's something that's been in place for about a month and is definitely helping expedite the process. So, and some of those assurances are really, really important. As we talk about the moratorium coming to an end, we want to make sure that we're helping families stay stable and helping landlords, get caught up with the rent that's owed to them.
Yeah, and providing several months is a very important opportunity for a lot of tenants. Unfortunately, with the federal eviction moratorium ending, it provides some more instability for folks, and not only for tenants, but for landlords who now have to figure out whether to allow folks to stay or allow them to get rental assistance to be able to pay back rent. We've had such a long time under the moratorium. Since about August or September of last year, there was the Kansas State moratorium instituted by the governor, and that was recently rescinded at the end of May. The only one that is currently operating is the federal eviction moratorium by the Center for Disease Control. We don't have a local one. That's not a very common thing, and definitely not in Wichita. So we're working just with that federal eviction moratorium, which covers quite a few people, but is predominantly focused on non-payment of rent. A lot of landlords here are probably familiar with that CDC eviction moratorium at this point, but to provide a little bit of background, since we have it in place for another couple weeks, the qualifications track rental assistance programs such as WERAP to make sure that there is some overlap between the people protected by the moratorium and then rental assistance to the landlords who have not evicted them during that time. Everybody that provides a declaration as a tenant to their landlord might qualify as a covered person as long as they're able to check the boxes on that declaration form. Not quite the income requirements as WERAP has at certain levels right now. As long as you have less than $99,000 of income in the past year, you can qualify. A few other important things to do during that time, though. You need to be seeking rental assistance, such as through WERAP, or if you're outside of the city of Wichita, through the Kansas State program. You also need to demonstrate a loss of income, or maybe substantial out-of-pocket medical expenses, or maybe you were laid off, and that usually needs to be tied to a pandemic impact or caused by COVID. To qualify for protection under the moratorium. And you got to be making your best efforts as a tenant at partial payments in the interim. And that's why it dovetails so well with the rental assistance programs, and hopefully that overlap can provide some stability for the whole housing situation.
Yes. That's great information, Nate. Thank you so much. There is has been a lot of confusion between the state moratorium, the federal moratorium. There were a lot of residents who felt that there just could never be evicted, which wasn't the case.
Mm-hmm.
It had to be a non-payment of rent situation, and they had to have that COVID-related impact and continue to try and make payments. And so not everybody avoided eviction during the moratorium. So it's definitely been very, very challenging. Now, for the WERAP program, we've received just over 4,000 applications so far. And of those, staff has been working on the first 2,242. So we are more than halfway through those applications.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We have issued 7,538 payments. That's a lot of payments. Yes, we have to break that down. So if someone has 6 months worth of arrears, we actually have to, accounting-wise, track that month by month, that's 6 payments. So we've put out almost $3.3 million so far. We've paid 367 different landlords and 7 different utility companies. So has had a pretty broad impact so far. We do have our goals as set by the Department of Treasury is to expend at least 65% of our allocation by September 30th. And in the past couple of weeks, we've been averaging just over $460,000 a week. At that rate, we'll actually have the full pot of first phase expended by the September 30th deadline, where we only needed to reach 65%. And had till September 30th of 2022 to expend it all. So we understand just how important it is to get the money out quickly. Landlords have been challenged. They haven't been being paid, and they have a lot of bills to pay too. Mm-hmm. So we are constantly evolving and adjusting our processes and our policies to try and make it faster, or try and make the process faster. And it has actually doubled in speed in the last couple of weeks due to getting staff on. We were challenged in getting people hired, just getting people to apply for positions, getting qualified candidates in, and then getting them trained. And so that's definitely been one of our challenges along the way. Our goal has always been, though, with this program, is to stabilize families, to try and prevent those evictions. And that falls back to some of the policies that we have put into play, in that we are only, we aren't paying landlords after they've evicted their tenants from the properties, and we're not paying clients arrears if they leave the landlord high and dry and just move out with a huge balance. And that's to level the playing field and try and encourage both sides. Have a little patience. We're working through it, and if they qualify for the program, help is definitely on the way.
Yeah, and that's the speed at which you're processing applications seems like it's going to be so important over the next couple months. This period of time between June 30th, September 30th, as we talked about before, the federal eviction moratorium is likely going to expire on June 30th. Mm-hmm. There were a few months ago maybe some indications, a possibility that it would be extended through September, but that seems exceptionally unlikely at this point. There have been a couple successful legal challenges at the federal court level that have stayed the moratorium, have stopped it from working, but then appeals courts have put it back into place at the same time. But that legal uncertainty, I think, is going to make it very difficult for the Biden administration or the CDC on its own to continue with the eviction moratorium. So we will have a few months where folks maybe face eviction without the protection of the moratorium, and the prospect of rental assistance seems like maybe the only thing that's going to keep them in their place, that provides some assurance to the landlord and then some stability to the tenant. So as quickly as possible sounds fantastic, I think, from both sides, as we enter a much grayer area of what to do.
Yeah, we're a little bit, concerned that, this tsunami of evictions is going to occur that we hear in some of the media. We, keep watching for that. We try and communicate as best we can with landlords who get weekly updates on the status. We are working, still working on applications that came in the first half of March, and that was just simply due to the number of applications that came in during that time. The first 7 days, we received 1,432 applications in 7 days. And then we received 1,398 for the whole month of March. So it was still pretty high, but it wasn't that 7-day trend. Yeah. But it also means, if you think about it, that's 2,700 out of the 4,000 came in during that first 6 weeks that we were open. And it is really slowing down, which is going to allow us to get caught up and get through this backlog of applications. So it's definitely a challenge. We are continuing to make improvements in that process, and are excited that we recognize that we will be able to fully expend the funds and get the money out as quickly as we can. So.
And I might mention as well, even with the moratorium expiring, since we have such rental assistance available and a very solid program here in Wichita to distribute it, the legal consequences of the moratorium, I don't think, are going to end on the exact date of June 30th. because the moratorium is so closely tied to something like rental assistance, and landlords and tenants should be working together to try to cover the back rent that a tenant might have accumulated since the moratorium has been in place during the pandemic. Landlords on here might be familiar with their regular landlord duty to mitigate. When a tenant, say, abandons the property, a landlord has an obligation, in Kansas at least, to try to find another tenant and not charge the former tenant the price of kind of the interim period when they were not there. That duty, that legal obligation, is built on a general contractual principle. We're dealing with a lease agreement here, a tenancy, that an injured party also just needs to mitigate their damages and not just cause extra harm because they think they can get money from the other side. And we at Kansas Legal Services believe that after the moratorium even, landlords maybe will not be able to collect back rent through the courts if they have not worked with their tenant on collecting rental assistance and providing sufficient time to do so, because that seems, especially during the pandemic and with the programs in place, a reasonable mitigation measure to take.
That's interesting. I mean, it's definitely a different take. Most people aren't understanding, right? Is that those remnants of the moratorium are going to continue forward as we move forward. So I did want to give just a couple of tips on how landlords can help the process. So we oftentimes, there are issues like I spoke before about who has true ownership, who has a right to receive payment, and ensuring that we have property management agreements if you're a property manager, because we're going to be coming back and going, why do you want us to pay you when so-and-so owns the property, right? Getting us full copies of leases. We do now include the landlord on the first contact to the resident that says, you didn't submit the copy of the lease. Oftentimes the landlords have that more aptly at their fingertips than the residents do. So they can absolutely submit that for their resident to help speed that process along. Making sure to submit that tenant landlord certification. We won't be issuing payments without the landlord certification. So that goes out. It only takes a couple of minutes. Make sure to turn that back in. If landlords have questions on the status or if they're not getting a weekly update, they can email wewrap@wichita.gov because maybe the resident provided the wrong email address or didn't provide one at all. So we can get that updated in the record so that the landlords can get that weekly update, letting them know that their resident is still on the list. We also, like I said, that first contact to tell the resident what they're missing. We've had a lot of landlords who, since we've done that, will work hand in hand with the resident to get it submitted. Oh, they need your checks, your more pay stubs? Let me help you email that over and get that over to them. So helping the resident helps them in the long run in getting their documentation in so we can get it approved. So at this point, we'd like to open it up for any questions from the audience, anything that we can answer, any questions that people have.
Right. Well, we did get a couple questions. The first one is, what information do landlords have to provide to help their renters?
So we just kind of talked about that a little bit. From the landlord, what we need is to complete that landlord certification. We need them to be able to document and tell us, what is owed. And we may need from them that copy of the lease because we're going to have to verify that fees that are being charged are in accordance with the lease. And so being able to communicate that to us definitely speeds things along. And keeping in contact when we're sending, to a resident that this is their final notice to submit documents, they may want to reach out to the resident themselves and say, hey, you're about to be withdrawn from the program if you don't get this in. So.
And I would also recommend on that note, like I was talking before about maybe mitigating the back rent by working on rental assistance, I would advise landlords in that situation to maybe keep a record if they're having difficulties with their tenant about working on rental assistance. So they have that verification for maybe a court process later to demonstrate that they were trying. That they were trying.
Yeah.
If tenants have applied for WeWrap and are in danger of being evicted, how can they work to ensure they're not evicted before their payment gets processed?
the biggest part on that is working with their landlord, because the landlord really will be controlling that process. And demonstrating to the landlord that they are doing everything within their power to make sure that we have everything that they need in order to get them qualified for the program. It goes hand in hand, the landlord and the tenant working together to try and resolve the issue that's going to benefit both sides.
And I might also suggest and do a little plug for Kansas Legal Services as well. If a tenant perhaps is having some difficulty working with a landlord, we recommend maybe reaching out to us, talk over some of the legal issues. You can find all of our information at kansaslegalservices.org. It provides a central intake line. You can call our Wichita office. We have services available in several different places throughout the state as well if folks are outside of Wichita. After about a year, we're seeing a lot of very acrimonious relationships at this point. A lot of rent might be due, a lot of difficulties between landlord and tenants, and sometimes maybe it helps to have a third party come in and talk, even maybe representing a tenant to break the ice a little bit between the tenant and landlord. And while Kansas Legal Services does tend to work more with tenants, we're also working with landlords through this situation. Through the pandemic, especially maybe smaller business landlords that are a bit more affected overall by the pandemic. We're willing to offer legal advice within our qualifications.
Great.
When can landlords expect their tenants to receive payment?
So it really, a lot of times it depends on how quickly the resident submits their documentation. So we've now exceeded 2,200 applications. We are now to having 2 applicants that actually submitted all of the required documents with their application. It was 1 for a while. We now had 2. So it is very common. People don't submit. It asks for a copy of the lease, not a copy of just the first page, and so we get a lot of the first page. We ask for income documentation, either 1040s for the whole household or 60 days of income for the whole household, and we'll get 1 check stub, and we're constantly having to go back and get more documentation. So it really depends on how quickly the documentation is turned in. And then the other part to that too is whether or not the landlord's an existing vendor. If they're already a vendor in the system, it's very quick from the time someone gets approved that we can queue up payments and get that going through the door. But if they're not a vendor, they have to get set up in the housing system, and then they have to get set up in the city's finance system. That can definitely slow things down. And so we definitely recommend landlords complete that landlord certification right away when they receive it, because that's going to give them those forms to fill out. Submit those so we can start that process of making sure they're a vendor at the same time we're reviewing the client's income and eligibility, housing stability eligibility, and all of that. So it really depends. I've seen it as fast as a week. I've seen it as slow as 3 months to get someone's payment out the door, because it was a constant back and forth for documents.
Will this program keep problem renters from being evicted?
Do you want to take that one?
Well, speaking broadly, right, and not knowing all of the program's rules and regulations, I think broadly speaking, the eviction moratoriums, for example, did not stop landlords from evicting tenants for real serious, just regular material breaches of the lease, basically. In the CDC eviction moratorium, there's a long explanation of the types of things even that would not qualify, and really anything a tenant does that might affect health and safety, that would violate the lease, or even if a lease just terminates because it's a month-to-month tenancy or the year-long lease is over, those things are not really covered by the eviction moratorium. And I think probably, again, not knowing all of your rules and regulations, the same logic will apply. Landlords sometimes have difficult tenants and cannot continue renting to them despite the possibility of rental assistance.
Correct.
Right. If landlords have more information on how to register themselves with the city or about this program, where can they go for more info?
Definitely. Always start, for this program, start at wichita.gov/WeWrap. We have all kinds of information. We have frequently asked questions. We have information on our policies and procedures. We have reports on funding that's gone out the door. That's definitely the place to start. If you can't get an answer there, it's always best to email. because it gives us an opportunity to look up the answer and get back to you when you call on the phone. It actually takes 4 or 5 times as long to get an answer and takes that person out of actually processing when that happens. So we always recommend people inquire at WeWrap at wichita.gov if they have any questions. They can send those questions. We have been hearing people calling, for example, the vendor registration form has purchasing's phone number on it. And so we have people calling purchasing going, what's my status on WeWrap? And honestly, purchasing's like, I don't have that information. So calling purchasing is not gonna help. They're not gonna be able to give an answer. That WeWrap at wichita.gov, those are the folks that are trained to be able to look into a circumstance and provide a response.
Some landlords and their tenants received CAP funding from earlier in the pandemic. How is WeWrap different?
Sure. So CAP was interesting. So CAP was a state-created program. So they used general CARES funds and were able to develop a program in which they devised their own rules and regulations about it. And they were able to pay up to $5,000 in rental arrears, which was great. I mean, it helped a lot. I can't tell you how many of our current applicants received funding under CAP and are now, that CAP has ended, are coming in for new funding. Now, both the WeWrap program and the new state program, CARA, are both funded by the same source. It's the Treasury Department, and they have specific rules that are very different than what was required under CARA as far as how we document income, how we document housing stability, how we document COVID impact, how we have to ensure or try to ensure there's no duplication of assistance, duplicative subsidy. So every time we're pulling someone off the list, we have to compare it to CAP, to CARA, to Center of Hope, to Salvation Army to make sure that we don't have duplicative assistance. CAP didn't have to do any of that. But on the good side of things, CAP was only $5,000 in rental arrears. WeWrap and CARA now through the states allow us not only to pay those rental arrears, but they let us pay prospective rent too for a period of up to 15 months of assistance. So if we're paying 6 months back, we could possibly do 9 months forward. 12 months back, we're going 3 months forward. But 15 months worth of assistance, and not just rent on the rent, but also on the utilities and other housing costs, fuel costs and things like that. So it is a game changer. It can really change a person's circumstances. I mean, CAP was great. We had our own similar program to CAP that we devised with EAP and CSBG funds last year. It was great at the time, but this is just such a game changer because even if I get someone caught up on rent today, the first of the month's right around the corner. And they're under that stress, and there's this additional threat of eviction. And so the fact that when we can qualify a family and we can go forward, so those landlords that are willing to wait and we help to get someone caught up, they also have that assurance of going forward and that rent's going to come and we pay it before the first of the month, and they're going to be able to receive that to help them stabilize too.
And that really was kind of the common problem we saw with CAP right afterward was we encountered quite a few situations where someone got money, and then immediately afterward we're seeking eviction because there was not much promise of rental income in the future. So puts us right back to where we started, basically.
Can landlords receive direct assistance from WeWrap?
I'm not sure. Do they not have to have a resident? Is that I'm trying to understand the question. The program is absolutely designed that it is the resident's eligibility, not really the landlord that makes the landlord is really a side effect that they are being helped. This program was designed to prevent evictions and assist residents. And that side effect is that the landlords get to be made whole too. So they have to have a resident, and that residency tenancy for our program has to be current. If that tenancy has terminated, we're not making payments.
May I ask on that, if a tenant does not submit the initial application, may a landlord submit that for them?
It's really challenging. They would not have access to the client's ID. They wouldn't
Yeah.
have access to their 1040 form. They wouldn't have access. We have since day one made it available. You let us know you have a resident. We can reach out to the resident and help them apply. And we do have people working in the community at neighborhood resource centers, at the Workforce Alliance that can help people to apply. But we can definitely make that reach out to the resident to say, hey, it takes only a few minutes to complete an application, and this could help save you from an eviction.
That's great. So we've had a lot of people apply. Could you talk a little bit about how people can still apply and what our cutoff is for the program?
Sure, they absolutely can still apply. Wichita.gov/WeWrap will take you, and then there's a button to click to start your application. We are going to continue to take applications as much as I believe we will fully expend round one of funding. We received actually an allocation for what's called round two of emergency rental assistance. We have made available to us another $9 million. Which is fabulous. So, once we run out of round one funding, we will be rolling straight into round two funding. That funding is actually available through September 30th of 2025. And the rules are a little bit different for round two funding when we get there, as far as, they're providing us some additional funding in the realm of housing stability. So being able to assist someone who may have been evicted or is living in a bad housing situation. Maybe it's domestic violence, maybe it's unsafe housing, where we can assist them to find safe, decent housing and then help them with their rent going forward. So that will gives us quite a bit more resources for our community. So it's great news.
And that's all the questions we have. Could you share with us one more time where people can reach out to for more information?
Sure. For general information, you can reach out to the WeWrap webpage at wichita.gov/WeWrap, WERAP. Or if they want to submit a question or ask for the status of one of their tenant applications, they can send an email to WeWrap@wichita.gov. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Please, if you have any questions, send those to WeWrap@wichita.gov, and we will be getting back to you. We do understand the importance of getting this money out, and we are working on getting it out as quickly as possible. And thank you so much, Nate, for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity and all the great work that you're doing.
Thank you.